denizens of the night. Welcome to another episode of the macabre, the terrifying. Tonight, let's heat things up a bit. As you may have guessed from our title, our protagonist is a volunteer firefighter. He hasn't been at it long and is anxiously awaiting his first big call. Well, he gets it, and much more besides. This story is called I'm a Volunteer Firefighter. This is the call that almost made me quit, and was written by Steve McNelly.
I didn't know what to expect when I signed up to be a volunteer firefighter. It was something I'd tossed back and forth in my head for a couple of years without actually pulling the trigger on it, until one night I finally mustered the courage to submit an online application to my local department. Fast forward almost a year to my fire academy graduation, when I knew without a shadow of a doubt that joining the fire service was the best decision that I had ever made. Following the academy, I was eager to put my training to the test and start responding to fire calls. The problem is that serious fires are, thankfully, much more rare than they used to be. Major, structure-engulfing fires only occur a handful of times a year in a community like mine, and as a volunteer, one really needs to be in the right place at the right time in order to make it on one of those calls. It is for this reason that several long months went by following my graduation, where, while I did go on plenty of calls, I never actually made it to any of the big ones. So when I finally found myself in the prime position to go on one of these major fire calls, I jumped at the opportunity. God knows I wish I hadn't. It happened in the middle of the afternoon, on a weekday that I had taken off from work. With my allotted free time, I had decided to go to the grocery store to buy a few things before the rush hour crowd showed up later that day. I was less than a minute from the store when that familiar alarm on my phone went off, and seeing as I was at a stoplight, I quickly checked the notification. When I saw that it was titled Fire, House, I knew that my shopping plans would just have to wait. The grocery store is right up the road from my firehouse, so it didn't take me long at all to get there. The paid guys were already rocketing out of the bay in the engine as I was pulling up, but thankfully 2 other volunteers arrived at the station at about the same time that I did. One of them was Rudy, a long-term volunteer and certified fire apparatus driver, so with him in the driver's seat, the 3 of us were able to throw our turnout gear into the ladder and take off, sirens screaming, hot on the heels of the career guys. Jack, the 3rd volunteer in our truck, sat next to me in the rear of the cab. The 2 of us pulled on our gear while Rudy ferried us to the waiting blaze. Garbled sentences that I struggled to make out over the static and blaring sirens sloshed their way over the radio. I shared a glance with Jack. He looked about as nervous as I felt, the difference between us being that I was better at hiding it than he was. The SCBA straps over his shoulders were poorly fitted, and he had the look of an anxious child on the first day of school wearing a backpack that was too large for him. I extended a gloved fist in his direction. "We got this." Jack hesitated, then offered his end of the fist bump. "Yeah." He sounded less confident than he probably would have liked. Certainly less confident than I had wanted him to be. Jack and I started volunteering around the same time, and so had gone to fire school together. We had been partnered up during certification testing, and while we managed to pass all of the necessary skills on our first try, I wouldn't have wanted to run them back again. Jack struggled through most of the skills, much like how he had struggled through most of fire school. To call him a liability feels too harsh, but he certainly wouldn't have been my first choice for a partner. This was his first major fire call too, and while we were definitely both nervous, I was worried about his ability to overcome those nerves. I was surprised to see Jack at the station that day, seeing as I knew he also worked a typical 9 to 5, but I had no need to question why Rudy was there. Rudy works nights, so he has plenty of time during the day to make it to fire calls. I don't know when the guy sleeps, but if he's awake and alert enough to drive the apparatus during the daylight hours, I guess that's good enough for me. I looked at him now. Even though I couldn't see his face, I felt an air of normality from him that helped to calm my own nerves. He's got a bit of a rough exterior, but there's no question that he knows his way around a fire scene, so having him along helped me to feel a bit more confident. For him, this was probably just another routine fire call, just like any other that he'd been on throughout his many years as a volunteer. He never could have known what was awaiting us. We turned down an old, well-traveled street and into a messily sprawled neighborhood that was surrounded by a dense collection of trees and filled with aging houses, some of which looked like crumbling tombstones ready to fall into ruin at the first moment of neglect. A thin gray haze drifted on the air outside of our apparatus. Its smell entered our truck's cab through the closed windows and made me think of cozy bonfires I enjoyed as a child. The sheet of smoke would have warned us of the waiting blaze had it not been easily visible through the truck's front windshield as soon as we'd turned into the neighborhood. A house on the far end of the street glowed a devastating orange that lit up the entire area, its radiance rivaling that of the bright afternoon sun. Its fully engulfed roof wore a twisting crown of flame that spat waves of onyx smoke up into the midday atmosphere. It looked as if hell itself had opened up directly beneath the structure, just so Satan could personally escort it down into the deepest, hottest depths. Even from several hundred feet away, I could tell that this fire was nothing like what we'd practiced on at the academy. At the academy, we battled against thin steel cages filled with burning straw, which practically extinguished itself at the first suggestion of water. In comparison, the fire that we continued to draw ever closer to was an uncontrollable entity of nature, one who told you through its very presence that it could consume the entire earth if it felt so inclined to do so. "Jesus," Jack muttered. "Big one, isn't she?" Rudy said. "Not a bad first fire for you boys. I've seen worse, but this'll do for giving you boys your wings." We passed by the engine, which had stopped to let one of the paid guys pull the 5-inch line off the back of the truck and drag it to the only fire hydrant I'd seen since we turned onto this street. The engine would be moving again in less than 30 seconds, but its delay meant that we in the latter would be the first to arrive on the scene. Other fire companies were en route, but our station, being the closest, had naturally made it there first. We'd have a good operation going by the time anybody else arrived to help us. The ladder came to a stop in front of the burning structure, and the three of us disembarked from the vehicle. The house, a typical 2-story, single-family dwelling, was positioned near a thick patch of forest that served as the natural border of this little forgotten neighborhood. The good news was that it was far enough away from the other buildings that it didn't pose an immediate risk to any of them. But the bad news was that a decent gust of wind could have easily sent rogue embers scattering into the nearby tree line, which could have resulted in a forest fire in addition to the blaze that we already had to combat. We needed to start getting that fire under control, and we needed to do it quickly. The next couple of minutes went by in a reflex-driven blur. Jack and I began pulling ladders off the back of our truck and throwing them up against second-story windows all around the building. Rudy acted as crowd control while he waited for fire police to show up. He used his years of experience to effortlessly keep the neighborhood's many onlookers at bay while the rest of us worked. The engine arrived not long after we did, and our fellows immediately pulled an attack line, which they used to start throwing water onto the blaze. The fire, continuing to grow and undulate, fought back against the aquatic stream. It almost seemed to have a malicious intent about it that sent a chill running through me despite the heat that blasted off of the building in oppressive waves. Soon, a second engine from one of our neighboring stations arrived, and with our combined hose streams, we finally managed to make some headway in the war against the raging inferno. Jack and I had just finished throwing up a ladder and were making our way back to our truck to grab another when Rudy approached us, bearing new orders. "Nobody's seen anybody come out of the building since the fire started," he yelled over the sound of all the commotion. "Which means there's a strong possibility that there are victims trapped inside. We're going to send you two in to do the primary search. The engine boys will keep attacking the fire from out here. Then they'll take their hose line in through the front door once the fire's more under control." "Which way are we going in?" I asked. "The fire looks to mostly be towards the A side of the structure, so we're going to send you in through the first floor on C side. You guys up for it?" Jack and I shared a look. I could see the nervousness in his eyes, but they also told me that he'd follow whatever decision I made for us. I returned my attention to Rudy and nodded. "Yeah." "All right," Rudy said. "Grab a set of irons. Remember to radio command before you make entry." He left us, and Jack and I quickly finished our walk back to the ladder. We each grabbed one half of a set of irons, him a Halligan, me an axe, before rushing to the rear of the structure. Gray haze radiated from the house and danced through the air in front of us as we went. When we reached the house's back door, we donned our masks and opened the cylinders attached to our SCBAs. The screens attached to our air packs came to life, and the HUD in my mask glowed with the display that I'd grown so accustomed to during academy training. Something about wearing that mask felt different now. Despite having done so countless times in class, I felt nervous taking my first loud mechanical breaths from the regulator. It made me feel like I was about to step into something that I would not be able to return from. Jack and I affirmed to one another that we were ready, and we approached the entrance. Jack immediately grabbed the handle and tried the door, which came open with no effort. I was glad that we would not have to make forcible entry, but I was annoyed with Jack for his behavior. We'd had it drilled into our heads from nearly the first week of fire training that you need to first check closed doors for heat with the back of your hand, then open them slowly in order to prevent any built-up smoke or fire from spilling out onto you. Jack had done neither of these things, and had instead carelessly thrown the door open in a way that, had a fire been present, could have led to immediate and dangerous consequences. Thankfully, the entrance was clear, so I didn't bring it up. Although, as I reflect on this moment, I wish that I had. Instead, I radioed to command that we were making entry, and then Jack and I stepped into the inviting wall of smoke that beckoned us from the other side of the threshold. We each turned on the flashlights strapped to our chest as we stepped inside, and I immediately realized just how little help they were going to be. The structure was lousy with thick, obsidian smoke, which sapped any and all light that it touched, including the light from our flashlights, both of which barely projected a few feet in front of us before their essence was consumed by the swirling darkness. It couldn't be helped. Searches of this type were often done in pitch blackness, and one could not rely upon their eyes to guide them. We would do like we had done many times in class and follow the wall with our hands. But the difference was that the flashlights had worked in class. The instructors had pumped the search structure with smoke, sure, but it hadn't been nearly thick enough to completely swallow the beams of our lights, and we'd still had them to fall back on in the event that we lost touch with the wall or with each other. We'd clearly be awarded no such luxury now. This smoke, so alien when compared to that from the academy, did not award many luxuries at all, it seemed. I was the first one inside, and as such was the one to lead the search. This meant deciding which way we went with it. "Right-hand search!" I yelled, my voice boosted by the amplifier attached to my mask. Then to any potential victims, "Fire department! Is anybody in here?" My call was met with silence. Taking the axe into my left hand, I placed the palm of my right against the wall on the right side of the door, and once Jack and I both confirmed we were ready, we lowered ourselves to our knees and began our hasty, sliding shuffle along the wall. Guided by touch, we made our way through the inky blackness of the smoke, first through what seemed to be a kitchen, and then into a dining room. The flashlights strapped to our bodies did their best to fight the darkness, but it remained a losing battle. I swept through the obsidian with the handle of my axe, searching for anything soft and flesh-like that might have been an unconscious, or worse, victim. It had bounced off the hard, unfeeling surfaces of furniture a few times, but did not touch anything that needed to be rescued. "What was that?" I heard Jack say from behind me. I turned around to look at him, then remembered that he only existed as a voice in that deep darkness. "What? I thought I saw something moving over there." "Jack, how can you see anything moving in here?" "I saw it in my flashlight beam," he said. "It looked like a person. I think there's somebody in here." "The smoke is probably disorienting you," I said. "Let's continue our search. If there's somebody here, we'll find him." He reluctantly agreed, and we continued on. We made it out into a narrow hallway, something I deduced when my axe was easily able to reach the opposite wall from the one guiding my right hand. We went a few gloomy feet down the hallway before he spoke again, bringing our search to another halt. "There it was again!" He sounded more frantic, alert. "It just went around that corner!" "What corner?" I said, losing my patience. "You can't see anything, Jack!" "Hello?" He called out into the darkness, ignoring me. "Are you all right? We're the fire department. We're here to help you." He paused. "Did you hear that? It was a woman's voice. She called for help." I heard nothing but the sound of distant structures groaning with the weight of the raging fire. "You're hearing things," I said in a tone that no longer masked my annoyance. "We need to finish our search, Jack. If anybody here needs our help, we'll find them." "She needs our help," he said. "She needs our help right now." Before I could respond, I felt and heard sudden frantic movement coming from behind me. A moment later, Jack's vague form, largely obscured in the umbra, shuffled past me into the waiting darkness. "Jack?" I said, quickly feeling for him with my axe. "Jack, get back to the wall!" Silence. I heard my own machine-like breathing, followed by more protests from weakening support beams. If the fire wasn't on this floor yet, it surely would be soon. I waited for so long that my SCBA's pass device, the system that automatically emits an alarm if a firefighter stays motionless for too long, began to sound. I instinctively shook my body in order to silence it. More seconds went by, and I called Jack's name again. When he didn't respond, I knew I had to make a decision. I certainly couldn't leave him there alone, in his panicked, seemingly delirious state, in that dying house. But to go after him would be to break the golden rule of searches that, like the door rule, they had drilled into our minds again and again at the academy. The one that my partner had broken mere moments ago. Never lose contact with the wall. I waited a few more moments, frantically trying to find a solution that did not exist, before I, too, broke that life-saving rule. I left the wall behind, and went after my lost companion. Without the wall to anchor me, I was immediately disorientated in the blackness. The murk twisted my mind and fogged my brain. Were it not for the glowing HUD and my mask focusing my mission, I would not have even known for sure whether I still existed on planet Earth, or if I was already lost somewhere beyond the firmament in the deep, dark reaches of space. I looked at this HUD now in order to check the status of my air cylinder. I was already more than a third of the way through the bottle, and was continuing to suck down air quickly. I knew I needed to find Jack and get him out of the building as soon as possible before we both ran out of air. I blindly crawled through the gloom for several minutes, sweeping the handle of my axe and calling out Jack's name with no result. The only thing I could be sure of was that I was no longer in the hallway where I had left the wall. This knowledge did me about as good as knowing that I wasn't in a public bathroom where I'd taken a leak 5 years prior. I looked at my HUD. Half of my cylinder was gone. Had I really been searching for Jack that long? Or had I just been struggling to control my breathing? I suddenly remembered that I had a radio, and, after fumbling for the mic, sent a transmission to command telling them that I had lost my companion and was attempting to locate him. After broadcasting my message, I waited for several seconds for a response that never came. I sent the same transmission again and received no acknowledgement that my message had been received. It was then that I realized I had heard surprisingly little chatter on the radio since entering the house. In fact, I don't think I had heard any chatter at all. There was no conceivable way that nobody had been communicating on the radio for the duration of the incident. The radio should have been abuzz with dozens of messages every minute, but it had been completely silent since we'd entered the structure. I had never even gotten a response when I told command that we were beginning our search. Had I somehow turned the dial to the wrong channel? Not likely, since I didn't think I'd heard anything on Jack's radio either, but I wouldn't have put it past him to have also been on the wrong channel or to have forgotten to turn on his radio altogether. I fumbled with my radio's dial for a few moments, switching it to a new channel, then back to the one I was supposed to be on. The radio's robotic voice confirmed I was on the correct channel, and yet still I heard nothing. Something must have been wrong with the machine. I could get that sorted out later, but for now, this meant I was on my own in my search for Jack. "Damn it, Jack, where are you?" I called, knowing that to do so was a waste of my most precious of resources. Every breath, every yell, every frantic shuffle forward used up more air. I was now more than halfway through my very limited supply. An orb of light cut through the darkness in a quick, short arc, so brief and so fleeting that I thought I'd imagined it. I came to a halt and looked in the direction it had come from. For a long time, there was nothing but further darkness, but just when I was losing hope that I'd see it again, another arcing sphere flashed in front of my mask. "Jack!" I said, hurrying in the direction of the light. "Wait up, Jack!" I rushed through the shadows, the swallowing smoke continuing to squeeze tighter and tighter around me with each passing moment. I knew I couldn't let that sinister stuff enter my lungs, even if I ran out of air. I was better off sucking my regulator to my face and passing out from lack of oxygen before I allowed that billowing death to take up residence inside me. My axe smacked into a nearby wall. I immediately made my way to that lovely beacon in the darkness and firmly pressed against it with the palm of my hand. I still had no idea where I was in the house, but the lifeline of the wall gave new vigor to my long-deceased hope. I followed the wall for about 30 seconds before my hand suddenly lost its embrace and drifted into an empty space. I turned my torso toward this gap and found that my flashlight's beam actually managed to penetrate the darkness here. In front of me was a cavity largely free of smoke. Within it was a descending stairwell that appeared to vanish into the gloom of a basement. But unlike that of the smoke, this gloom was defeatable by my beam. I could see downward for several steps, but more importantly, I could see the second beam at the bottom that was immediately lost as it turned a corner and vanished into the basement. "Jack!" I called again. "Wait!" Remembering my training, I turned around and descended the stairs backwards. I really should have tested each stair with my foot before putting my full weight on it, but I knew they had held beneath Jack's weight, and since the fire had not been down this far yet, I felt confident enough in their integrity to move quickly. My confidence in them proved to be well-founded, because they held strong until I reached the bottom. Now, standing up, I followed in the direction of Jack's beam, allowing a quick moment to survey my new environment as I went. From what I could see of the basement, it appeared to be unfinished and composed entirely of cement and brick. It also appeared to be empty, devoid of any furnishings, and not even in use as a place for storage. I had the fleeting thought that it was strange to leave such a valuable space in a state of disuse, but my preoccupied mind had too much to worry about to hold on to that notion for very long. As it turned out, I didn't need to go far before I captured Jack's form in the halo of my flashlight. He was also on his feet, his back turned to me, only a couple of yards from the short hallway that led to the stairwell. I caught up to him in a matter of seconds and threw my free hand onto his shoulder with no small display of force. "Are you out of your damn mind?" I barked at him. "You could have gotten us both killed." He only offered me a brief, disinterested glance before turning his head forward again. I followed the gaze to the end of his beam, where I saw the thing that so greedily monopolized his attention. Standing in the middle of that basement, her back turned to us in the same way that Jack's had been to me, was the figure of a woman. "Holy shit," I said, dumbfounded. "You were right." Jack kept his attention focused on the woman in front of us, who did not turn at the sound of my voice. It was hard to make out many of her details, save for the fact that she was dressed in a set of dark blue flannel pajamas. Most of her other features remained a mystery to me, as I'm sure they did to Jack. "We're with the fire department," Jack said, his voice sounding uncertain and tired through the amplifier. His projected mechanical breaths, much like my own, were shallow and clumsy. "We're here to help you. Are you all right, ma'am?" When she didn't respond or turn around, he took a cautious step toward her. "Ma'am," he said, "can you hear me? Are you hurt?" Another few seconds of silence passed before she began to slowly walk toward the rear of the basement. Jack watched her in confused disbelief for a moment before he followed after her. "Wait!" I yelled. He ignored my call. Jack made it to the center of the basement just as the woman neared the rear wall. My companion's flashlight, which remained trained on the woman, now projected its soft ring of a beam past her onto the far wall of the basement, built into which was a single wooden door. The faded length of wood was shut in place and locked tight with a thick, rusty iron bolt. As the woman drew closer to the waiting door, her shadow grew larger against the wall. My eyes were so focused on the woman herself that I didn't immediately notice how her shadow began to shift and change as it grew. When I finally spotted it, looming over the entire basement from the stone throne that was the back wall, I felt my mouth go numb. The shadow was, for lack of a better word, inhuman. To try to describe it much further than that would be a foolish, impossible task. But the one thing I'm almost certain that I could discern from that dark, towering shape was a set of long, sinister horns resting atop its head. In the moment, I thought these to be a trick of the uneven lighting in the room. Now I know better. Now I know them for what they really were. The woman effortlessly unlatched the heavy bolt. She wrapped a pale hand around the doorknob and twisted her wrist. The door swung open with an echoing, primordial creak. I only saw the blackness beyond its threshold for a brief moment before the woman disappeared inside and pulled the door shut behind her. Her hulking shadow remained in the room with us, resting against the wall even after she was gone. Jack never seemed to notice it looming over him. "Wait!" Jack yelled. He followed after her, rushing toward the door, his flashlight shaking wildly as he went. "Come back!" I, in turn, rushed after him. Something deep within my bones told me that I needed to stop him from opening that door. "Wait, Jack, stop!" He once again, and for the final time, refused to heed my warning. I had barely made it halfway across the room before his gloved hand wrapped around that same knob, and he pulled the door open with a hasty, energized jerk. Where once was darkness, now waited a blazing hell. A rectangle of saffron and gold filled the doorframe for the briefest of moments before it came spilling out into the greater basement. Infernal fire discharged from the portal in a violent stream of Stygian puke. Jack was swallowed by the unholy broth faster than he could even scream. But though I'm sure he never made a sound, to this day I can still hear his tortured, immortal wails in the deepest bowels of my soul. The force of that terrible excretion knocked me off my feet with such overwhelming power that I was sent sprawling onto my back. I landed several feet away from where I once stood with a violent crash, losing my axe in the process. My body rang with the pain of the collision, especially where my back landed on my SCBA. I immediately heard a sharp hissing sound coming from behind me, and I knew that my air cylinder must have suffered a breach. Glancing at my air supply, I saw it rapidly pass below 30%. Fire gushed into the room and began to spread with impunity, despite the space's stone composition not being conducive to the blaze's new, zealous life. I was overwhelmed by a despicable heat that I had never known before and which I hope to never know again. My distressed mind retreated back to those practice fires we fought in the academy, the ones fueled by straw and goodwill. I thought I knew what heat was during those drills, but now, as the essence of hell itself seemed to wash over me, I understood that those fires would never in countless lifetimes have been able to prepare me for the inferno that now threatened to reduce me to ash with the mere flecks of its mighty suggestion. I needed to get out, but I knew that I wouldn't be able to rise to my feet on my own. The overwhelming pressure that flowed from that doorway kept me pinned to the ground. I anxiously searched for my radio mic, knowing that it likely wouldn't do me any good, but desperately needing to find it anyway. When I found it, I brought it up to my mask and slammed my clumsy gloved finger against the push-to-talk button. "Mayday! Mayday! Mayday!" I shouted, probably to nobody. I was supposed to wait for my mayday to be acknowledged, but in my panic, I skipped this step. I didn't expect to receive a response anyway. "This is Search Team 1. We've been overwhelmed by flashover in the basement. Both firefighters are down. We need immediate rescue. Repeat, immediate rescue." If I ever got a response, I didn't hear it. My ears were suddenly burning with the sound of my SCBA's low air alarm, which was soon joined in its song by my pass device once again activating due to my lack of movement. I became lightheaded as the precious few sips of life that remained in my cylinder fled through its breach. I knew I didn't have long before I would pass out from a lack of oxygen. Soon my world would become an even greater darkness than that of the all-consuming smoke, and that would be the end of me. But before consciousness slipped away from me, I felt an overwhelming urge to look in the direction of the spewing doorframe. The inhuman shadow, still looming there, had become so large that its tenebrous form covered more than half of the room, and it only continued to grow. The hissing and crackling of the inferno that deluged from the hellish aperture suddenly sounded to me like the many uncountable screams and wails of the damned. And as my world faded away, I thought I heard Jack's tormented voice among them. I knew that soon my own voice would join that very same chorus. I dreamt of evil and of unfathomable heat. For a while, all I could see was red. As my vision cleared and my mind came into focus, I saw that I was in a massive cavern of fire. Jack was before me, screaming, naked as the day he was born, hoisted onto a crudely built crucifix. He was on fire. He burned for a very long time while I watched in horror, hopeless to help him. His skin fell away in long, goopy strings that looked like melted wax. Soon his muscles and organs did the same, until all that remained was his charred, blackened skeleton. He still had his eyeballs, though. Those lasted even longer than his bones, which seemed to burn for several eternities until they finally crumbled away. Before his eyes joined the soup that was the rest of his body, I could see in their reflection that great, terrible shadow, the one I was sure possessed a pair of long, sharp horns. When I awoke, the screaming form of Jack was replaced by the crying face of my wife. She hugged me with as much vigor as she dared to. The embrace lit a fire in my aching body, but it also filled me with an overwhelming sense of relief even before my brain was awake enough for me to realize where I was. Not in a burning pit of damnation, but in a hospital room. I learned from the doctor that I had been unconscious for more than 24 hours, and that my wife had spent nearly every single minute of that time by my side. I spent some time piecing together the foggy memories of my ordeal, which seemed to float in space as many individual fragments. When those fragments finally came together, a burning question rushed to the forefront of my mind. I asked the doctor about Jack. Her grim reaction to my question was all that I needed to confirm my companion's fate. I knew what she would tell me before the words had even left her mouth. "I'm sorry, but he didn't make it," was all she said to me on the matter. It was clear that I wouldn't be getting any more details from her. My room was a revolving door of visitors for the rest of that day, including several of the guys from my firehouse, who came by as soon as they learned that I was awake. Included in that number was Rudy, as well as our deputy chief, who, after giving me all the good wishes of those at the station who couldn't make the visit, steered the conversation to a rather uncomfortable subject that I was dreading from the moment he had arrived. He asked me what I remembered about that call. I was mostly honest with him. I told him about how Jack, in what I thought to be a panicked, hysterical fit, had abandoned our search to go after a victim that he had thought he'd seen in the darkness. I told him about how I followed after Jack and how I'd found him in the basement. I left out everything about the woman with the inhuman shadow, as well as how Jack had followed her to that back room before he was engulfed in flame. In my spoken version of events, Jack, still hysterical, had haphazardly opened the door in the basement, thinking it was the way out, which is when the fire came pouring in. That was when I passed out, and the next thing I remembered was waking up in the hospital. In exchange for my story, I was given the details that I so desperately craved. Jack, having burned to death, was the only person to perish in that fire. No other victims were discovered in the house after they'd gotten the blaze under control. In fact, nobody had been able to contact the owners of that house at all. They seemed to have completely disappeared off the face of the planet. Apparently, Command had heard every transmission I had sent over the radio, but Jack and I had never responded to any transmissions that they had sent back. That one was chalked up to malfunctioning equipment. The other anomalies could not be so easily explained. The RIT team had found me unconscious in that dreaded basement. They had expected to pull me out of a raging blaze, but by the time they'd gotten to me, there was no fire there to speak of. They knew the fire had to have been there at one point because the room's walls and floor were blackened by their exposure to the blaze, and because the state of Jack's charred remains could only be explained by the presence of fire. They found him lying in front of the door that I had mentioned, but that door was not only closed shut, its wooden surface was completely untouched by the inferno that had evidently scorched the surrounding basement before disappearing entirely. How the fire had spread along the stone surfaces of the basement was anybody's guess. In fact, it made even less sense for the fire to have reached the basement in the first place, because it had been determined with reasonable certainty that the fire had been started in either the attic or on the second floor, and the blaze hadn't even made it to the first floor before it had been put out. Any fire that existed in the basement needed to have been independent of the original blaze, and it needed to have put itself out just as easily as it had started. Such matters were under investigation. After wishing me a quick recovery and a hasty return to the firehouse, the deputy chief and the others left my room. As he left, Rudy flashed me a troubled look that I didn't understand at the time, but which would make sense to me soon enough. I wasn't well enough to go to Jack's funeral. I was not surprised to learn that his casket was closed. About a month has passed since that nightmare of a day. I've since been discharged from the hospital and have resumed my duties as a firefighter. Over this past weekend, Rudy and I volunteered to cover a shift because the paid guys had an event to go to. It was just the two of us at the station for an entire 12 hours. I didn't mind. It was a quiet day, and Rudy's decent enough company. He keeps the conversation interesting at the very least. The afternoon was unseasonably warm, so we pulled out a couple of lawn chairs and sat just outside the bay, taking in the nice weather. Our conversation meandered through a series of inconsequential topics, all of which felt like attempts to tiptoe around the subject that we both knew we wanted to confront. Eventually, Rudy saw it fit to just tear the bandage right off. "I'm glad that fire didn't get the both of you," he said, after a brief lull in the conversation. The bluntness of his words had slightly taken me aback. "Thanks. I guess I am too." "A shame what happened to that kid." Rudy paused to take a drag from his cigarette. The sight of the smoke leaving his mouth and nose made me want to vomit. "I hope you don't blame yourself for what happened to him." I sighed, my gaze focused on the road in front of our firehouse. "I try not to." "You did all that you could for him. That's all anybody can ask of you." Another paused to smoke. "You know, that entire call still doesn't sit right with me." I turned to look at him now. His eyes were already there to meet mine. "What do you mean?" I mean, I've fought a lot of house fires in my day, kid," he said. "A lot of them. And I've never seen a fire fight back nearly as hard as that one did. It was almost like it had a mind of its own or something. I'm actually surprised we managed to get it put out before it took the entire house. We needed 4 fire companies and twice as many apparatus to finally kill that thing. And then there's the matter of how that fire, which started and ended in the upper floors of the building, somehow reached a basement with no combustible material in it, only to vanish like it wasn't ever there. He paused. This time he didn't bring his cigarette to his lips. I haven't ever said I thought a fire was alive before. Not in all my time fighting them have I ever even considered that they might be something other than what I've always known them to be. Unthinking, unfeeling bringers of destruction. But that fire? Well, I just don't know what to think after what I saw that day. He raised an inquisitive eyebrow at me. You sure you told the deputy chief everything that happened in that house? I frowned at this. For a moment, I considered telling Rudy the truth, and I almost did. But then I considered the potential consequences of telling him what I think, what I know I saw in that house, and I thought better of it. Yeah, all that I remember of it at least. Why do you ask? He shrugged, looking unconvinced. Just asking is all. He tossed the cigarette onto the ground and stomped it out with his boot. Weak streams of smoke drifted up from its ruined carcass. But hey, if you ever find yourself remembering anything else about that day that you want to talk about, you come and find me, all right? I'll listen. You better know I'll listen. I nodded. Thanks, Rudy. I appreciate that. Of course, he said. We've got to support each other, kid. It can take a lot out of us running into those buildings without knowing if we're ever going to come back out. Sometimes some of us don't. Sometimes, he allowed a long pause. Sometimes we wish we didn't. He let the conversation go after that. We finished the rest of our shift without talking about that day again, though I know it still weighed on both of our minds. Maybe I'll tell him what really happened in that house one day. I haven't decided yet. I haven't told anybody what happened in there yet. I'm debating if I even want to post this or not. Part of me thinks it might be for the best that the truth remains buried with Jack. The selfish part of me really wants to get the truth of that day off of my chest, despite any consequences that may come as a result. I think that part of me is going to win. Regardless of what I choose to do, though, I know this for certain. I'll never be able to forget what happened to me that day. I'll never get the memory of Jack's horrific end out of my mind, just like I'll never be free of the image of that inhuman shadow looming over its court of dancing, sinister flame. Even as I write this, I feel myself tormented by a harsh, malicious heat. A constant reminder that whatever it is I saw in that basement is still with me, and its fiery anger burns red hot.
Ooh, that was a hot one. We don't get to hear about enough demons on this channel, don't you think? I especially enjoyed the author's description of being inside a burning building. It's either very well researched or personally experienced. Fire, like water, is one of those elements that we've all settled into a comfortable relationship with. We like to imagine we've got it mastered and brought to heel. But when the tables turn, we remember that we live our entire lives just a few mistakes away from a conflagration like the one in this story. Well, perhaps fewer portals to hell on average? If you enjoyed this story, please check out more from this author in the links below. Please also leave a like on this video and a comment if you can. And subscribe to hear more stories like this one. Whatever you do, check the doorknob first. And don't fall asleep. Ooh, hot!